75 years ago, when the clock struck 12 on 15th August, chiming with Nehru's speech, Tryst with Destiny, we forgot that the most important and daunting task at that time was to write a constitution. The country was rampant with poverty, high rates of illiteracy, rampant malnutrition, amidst the myriad of other issues, social, cultural, and economic, that was challenging India. Despite all, we had a constitution that was adopted on 26 November 1949 in the Constituent Assembly and brought into force on 26 January 1950. The articulate account of the fundamental rights, the directive principles of state policy, and the clear demarcation of responsibilities between the state and the central governments is continues to hold relevance today in the legal and governance discourse. Indian constitution is still a living document, pulsating with over 105 amendments made to it. Therefore, the most apparent yardstick to measure governance had to be the constitution. Public Affairs Index therefore analyzes the states on their basis of endeavor of the states in realizing this constitutional mandate. The spirit of justice invoked in the preamble to the Constitution can be interpreted as the guiding principle for all the elements of the Constitution. Therefore, PAI 2022 places critical importance on justice, social, economic, and political, as the lens of governance analysis in India. As Kafka's parable goes, the team now found ourselves standing before the law. The new mountainous task was to quantify something that Austin Granville called the cornerstone of the nation. How do you quantify the Constitution? In our first ideation meeting, Mr. Gurucharan, the director, told me, quoting Adam Smith, that parsimony is a virtue and Anjana, you have to pursue it. When we started PI in 2016, we had over 100 indicators, which was brought down to around 50 in the previous three versions. Today, we have 22 indicators, and the rationale for identifying these 22 indicators was to go by a first principle basis while recognizing that governance is at the intersection of processes, institutions, and outcomes. PI adopts a purely outcome based selection of indicators. For example, a state may have 100 hospitals, 2,000 beds, 50 testing centers, and a brilliant supply chain management. All of these would result in reduced deaths and reduced disease burdens. So in PI, we only look at those reduced deaths and reduced disease burdens. The items in the state list, the transferred items in the concurrent list, and the directive principles of state policy was scrutinized by the team carefully over a long period of time through the lens of social, economic, and political justice to arrive at the key outcome based indicators. In PI 2022, we have three themes, five sub themes, and 22 indicators. The first theme that we look at is economic justice, which has two sub themes, that is, revenues of state and social security and social insurance. The second theme that we analyzed was political justice and with the lens of rule of law. And the third theme is social justice, which we looked at through the lens of securing social order for promotion of welfare and the control of material resources. Now I'll move on to the methodology that we've used in PI 2022, which also sees a paradigmatic shift. Until the previous years, we used the principal component analysis, and this time, with the help of Professor Rituparna, we were able to identify the multi criteria decision making model. The MCDM is usually used in businesses to identify the best alternative. When you have 3 to 4 different things to choose from and 5 to 6 different ideas within those themes, we use multi criteria decision making approach. In PI 2022, we use multi criteria decision through the technique for order of preference by similarity to ideal solution, which is TOPSIS. So essentially, what we do is we don't give a weight to the indicator. We measure how far away from the worst performing state and how close to the best performing state that particular value is. So we don't need to say, oh, this is important, let's give it a 20% importance, or this is important, let's give it a 30% importance. What we see is the best performing state becomes the benchmark, and you have to be really far away from the worst performing state to get the best rank. We also use the Mahel-Dobbs distance to identify from the 22 indicators to reduce the dimensionality and bring it to 1 point so that it's comparable between states. In addition to eliminating assignment of weights to indicators, using the Mahel-Dobbs distance also takes into account the covariance between the indicators, thus substantially reducing the pre-processing required for data sets. Now let's go into how we've divided states in PAI 2022. Using the population, now you cannot compare a state like Uttar Pradesh with a state like Goa. We've analyzed 28 different states in India and bifurcated them on the basis of population into 18 large and 10 small states. While the previous year looked at union territories, this time we've kept it aside because when we're analyzing it through the lens of the constitution, it becomes difficult to uniformly assign importance for the union territories and the states. Say, for example, we also considered retaining only those union territories with a legislative assembly. However, if you take the case of Delhi and an indicator like crime, police in Delhi is controlled by the central government, the Home Department under the Government of India. So it did not make sense to attribute their failures or successes to the Delhi government. And therefore, we've kept aside the union territories this year. I shall now try and briefly provide insights thematically for the three themes: economic, political, and social justice. The first one would be economic justice, equities and inequities. Economic distribution and redistribution is a recurrent theme in the discourse of justice. Directive principles of state policy and all the other parts of the Constitution provide obligatory attention to equitable distribution of resources, making available equal opportunities to different communities, and the freedom from the slavery of economic necessity. A country's economic progression can be analyzed through economic growth as well as economic development. What economic growth could be measured in the terms of GSDP? Is there a growth in GSDP? Yes. So there is economic growth. Economic development, however, looks at the quality of life and the inherent economic well being of the community that should have ideally happened if there is a growth in GDP. We take care of both those aspects. Since governments are in a constant endeavor to balance and prioritize their multitudinous responsibilities, economic stability is what gives them the autonomy to do whatever they want to do. Bearing the fundamental responsibility for economic development, PAI 2022 analyzes the revenues of state through three indicators. Public expenditure on development, that is, what percentage of the GDP does a state government spend in improving development? The second indicator was labor productivity. We measured it in terms of gross state domestic product per hour of what a person contributes to the economy, what is the productivity coming out of it. And the third indicator is own source revenue mobilization. If the gross state domestic product is taken as the pool available for the state, what percentage of it does the state avail as their own revenue? The second aspect of economic justice is social security and social insurance. We look at it through five different indicators: unemployment rate, gender contrasted worker population ratio. So we see the difference between the male and the female worker population ratio. We look at the standard of living of Mandega workers, because if you look at the state intervention in terms of wages comes when unemployment through Mandega is looked at. So we look at the difference between the Mandega wage notified by the state and the state notified state poverty line. How far away is a Mandega wage worker able to live with the income he gets from the state notified scheme? We look at Gini index, which measures economic inequality, and we also look at the proportion of population covered by social safety nets. This map outlines the broad top performers and bottom performers. So Karnataka and Maharashtra, interestingly, they have the fourth and the fifth highest per capita net domestic product, respectively. But they recorded high inequality of distribution in the states. Now, this could be a function of high slum population in Maharashtra, in a state like Maharashtra. But what is important to note here is that there is also a high urban rural divide. If your growth wasn't concentrated in one single point, you wouldn't have people flocking into the capital, and then therefore that would help reduce the rural urban divide. Same applies for Karnataka. States recording very low multidimensional poverty index like Kerala, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu seem to be allocating less than 9% of their GDP to development growth. The converse also holds true. States with high multidimensional poverty like Chhattisgarh, Assam, Odisha, Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., seem to be earmarking higher proportions of their GSDP towards development. While state budgets witnessed accretion in development expenditure, a consequential portion of it is spent in interest payments and loan repayment. In the backdrop of Sri Lanka's financial crisis, these states should carefully reassess their state budgets for fiscal risks as it could prove untenable in the long run. A common cause of worry that appeared across the states were fiscal risks associated with unsustainable debts, high income inequality despite net domestic product, reduced female participation in economic activities with increasing urbanization. So you see that a higher rate of women are participating in the economy in a rural area as opposed to urban areas. And this was seen across. Another very disturbing finding was an increased rate of unemployment among the educated and skilled sections of the society. With an increase in education, you see a higher rate of unemployment. With that, I'll move on to the political justice. The conceptualization of political justice heavily relies on the concept of rule of law. The prominent themes explored include looking at the efficient governance of the criminal justice system and the commitment of the states in realizing the federalist structures of democracy that is mandated by the Constitution through the 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts. The legitimacy of a state comes into question when it fails to wield authoritative and autonomous control over violence. In modern society, that autonomy translates to the responsibility of maintaining law and order in the state and assuring a sense of security to its citizens. The analysis of criminal justice system was undertaken through three indicators, which is police efficiency. We looked at how efficient the police were in generating evidence for a case. How what proportions of the case were dismissed because there was no evidence, but it was true. And NCRB offers this data as is. The second indicator was under trial population in prisons. Now, prison overcrowding, you must have heard about, is a very important issue. These under trial population in prisons, we saw reports which showed that a lot of these police officers do not know who gets a bail and who doesn't. And because of it, there is a lot of overcrowding in prisons. And the third indicator is the rate of crime per lakh population, as provided by the National Crime Records Bureau. These are the ranks across the small and large states. The commitment to decentralization, the small states seem to be struggling with. In most of the large states, you see that urban devolution has happened to a higher extent when compared to rural devolution. But in states like Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, there seems to be higher devolution in rural areas as compared to urban areas. Because when it is easier to devolve urban functions, it's interesting to note that the opposite is happening in these states. The top performer in the small states category is Uttarakhand. I'm not sure if this code is legible, but the score tallies with Punjab, which ranks ninth among the large states. You see how far below the large states the small states seem to fare. And on the whole, the range of scores, the difference between the best performer in political justice and the worst performer in political justice is not a huge gap. This says that even though there is, a best state and a worst state, on the whole, all states seem to be facing some issue in addressing political justice that we've conceptualized. This is an indication that the best performer is not substantially better off than the worst performer. Moving on to social justice. Social protection and welfare occupy a sense of primacy in the discourse of justice. The critically and controversially debated 42nd Amendment Act incorporates the word socialist to the preamble of the Constitution. probably an indication of how important it is. Amartya Sen's capability approach guides our conceptualization of social justice. That is, that every individual should have the freedom to achieve the well-being, and this is evaluated on the basis of their capabilities and functionings of the individual. For example, development is not whether I have food, I have shelter, and it's not only that. It is also that if I want to fly a plane, I have the freedom, the economic freedom, and the sensibility to fly a plane. And that is how Amartya Sen defines capability. PAI 2022 conceptualizes social justice in the context of human development and the governance of commons through these two subthemes: the securing social order for promotion of welfare and control of material resources. Control of material resources looks at sanitation, drinking water, access to clean cooking fuel, uninterrupted power supply, and the trades and logistics ecosystems of the state. And securing social order for promotion of welfare is analyzed through four different indicators: premature mortality, early childhood development outcomes, learning achievements, and land degradation. Now, Punjab and Haryana have made great strides in terms of health and education, particularly education. In the National Achievement Survey of 2017, Punjab and Haryana were some of the worst performing states. And in the National Achievement Survey that assesses learning outcomes that was released in 2020, they're the best two states. States like Tamil Nadu seems to have declined in performance at the same time. Punjab and Haryana show very similar areas of good performance. For example, access to sanitation, drinking water, clean cooking fuel, uninterrupted power supply, and the trade and logistics ecosystem. Closely followed by Punjab and Haryana is Kerala. Kerala has achieved great strides in limiting premature deaths, in providing early childhood development outcomes, and in access to sanitation. However, all these three states, Punjab, Haryana, and Kerala, experience high rates of unemployment. So, if there is no steady source of income for the people in the state, it could mean that whatever the strides they've made in improving the human development could be at risk because of its unsustainability. Among small states, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, and Sikkim occupy the top three ranks. Goa is closely following behind at the fourth position. However, the rate of land degradation in the state seems to be causing an issue. While we thought it could be because of the topography of the state itself, it says that the highest contribution to land degradation in Goa is vegetable degradation, which is again a matter that requires attention. An analysis of malnutrition progress made by states were compared with the National Family and Health Survey Round 4 and Round 5. We see that several states, even champions like Kerala, seems to record an increase in the rate of stunting, wasting, and underweight among children under the age of 5. Haryana, Punjab, and Tamil Nadu seem to have overtaken Kerala in the percentage of in reducing the number of children who are wasted. Among small states, it's even more alarming. 7 out of the 10 small states show a decline in at least one type of malnutrition, either stunting, wasting, or underweight. A grim trend of unsustainability seems to lace growth in parameters of human development across several states. Findings from PAI should act as a call for action to states to consider a serious reorientation of their policy towards improving human development. A program evaluation for schemes aimed to improve nutrition and learning outcomes seem to be the need of the hour. With that, we conclude the thematic insights to PAI 2022. I would now like to introduce another innovative endeavor pursued by the Public Affairs Index 2022 team. As an addendum to the quantitative exercise, we've also initiated an inquiry into the citizen centricity of the states. This element that provides a qualitative flavor to Public Affairs Index 2022 was conceptualized and driven by my colleague and team member Nidhi, closely supported by Ramana, who led the efforts to research and develop the methodology used for the analysis. Nidhi will now be providing brief insights into the emergent narratives of justice.
Thank you, Anjana, for your very eloquent presentation on the central premise of PAI. Like Anjana mentioned, PAI undergoes periodic systematic reviews, and this time we try to add a qualitative flavor to the findings. In a democracy, citizen preferences are, at least in principle, reinforced by regular elections. Why then do policies fail? We think that it is because of the local context and how policies apply to a very non-linear demographic and geography. Policies and politics are afflicted by a certain unpredictability in the public eye. Their reception is very contextual. This is especially true of a country as diverse as India. PI 22 therefore took upon itself the challenge of quantifying or at least analyzing in a systematic way all of these narratives and all of these local contexts that socially construct policies and politics. Gaining currency across research methods, narrative policy framework is a novel theoretical methodology premised on the very lifeblood of politics, narratives. PI 2022, ladies and gentlemen, mobilizes the same to supplement the rankings with citizens' voices from across the states. We move next to the empirical application of this very qualitative exercise. Foremost in this application was to determine a suitable forum from where we could extract narratives. And this forum was identified as Twitter. Geotag tweets were mined and they were siloed for PI 22's 28 large and small states. Using tweets are posts or messages on the platform Twitter. Using tweets as proxies for the pulse of social construction of policy objects, emergent public sentiment was categorized as negative or positive. The sentiment was selected on the basis of a thorough literature review. The policy objects for the sentiment analysis were dependent on a thorough literature review and what made news and what generated polarizing opinions. Importantly, these objects speak to the framework elucidated by Anjana in her presentation of Public Affairs Index 2022. It treads on the same framework of 3 themes and 5 sub-themes. I would actually like to digress from the established protocol of presenting the methodology before the findings, and I think it would aid a fuller appreciation of the exercise. So we move on first to the findings. All, all that you need to know as the audience is that it is a highly qualitative exercise and it is indicative in its sum and substance. That is to say, it is not statistically representative. And since it is very elaborate and comprehensive in its nature, for the sake of the presentation, it has been subjected to some sort of oversimplification. With this in mind, we move to the findings. Pertaining to narratives of economic justice, we looked at budget, fuel, agriculture, and employment. I'm sure this text is not legible, but if you look at the barometric visualization from red to green, red represents negative and green represents positive. Very interesting findings emerged, and these findings would actually find resonance in public parlance, common parlance. For budgets, for example, people in Uttarakhand appeared very negative. Users in Uttarakhand appeared very negative. On further prodding, however, it was not on account of the state government's budget that the people were negative. It was on account of the union budget 2022-23. To quote, one user summarizing a lot of other opinions which had been expressed in the state, one user claimed, the budget is anti-people, anti-farmers, anti-youth, and pro-corporate. On the other hand, states like Rajasthan recorded very positive views. What worked for Rajasthan? One said that it's the Krishi farm budget and lauded it as agricultural revolution and also lauded the state's efforts in recognizing the Annadatas. Fuel, for example, had similar polarizing opinions. People in Uttarakhand wanted a nationalized pricing for fuel and were very critical of the fact that there was a differential pricing policy across states. On the other hand, in Karnataka, uh, there was discourse surrounding a purported accommodation of farm loan waiver that hiked the petrol and diesel prices. Madhya Pradesh, on the other hand, was largely positive in that it celebrated little breaks in the hike of fuel. In terms of employment, as you can see on the third image, Manipur and Kerala appear to bear a negative burden of opinion. In Manipur, it was because of the demand for jobs that was not being met. In Kerala, it was a similar thought, but it was also hyphenated by opinions which indicated a politicization and communalization of employment, in that people said that jobs were reserved for those who had contacts and money. The accolades of Goa in this scheme were appreciated, and employment avenues, very innovative employment avenues such as jobs in mining, were identified. In agriculture, intuitively, Karnataka is on the negative end of the spectrum, and a lot of the many from the audience would recognize that farmer suicides dominate the discourse in terms of generating negative sentiment in the state, and this emerged from our findings. Similarly, for political justice, in capturing how the public perceives the preambular spirit of the constitution in perceiving political justice, we looked at elections and law and order. The very foundation of a democracy is fair elections, fair and free elections. So we looked at elections and law and order. In terms of elections, intuitively, West Bengal and its elections were highly criticized, not only in that state but across the country. People called it spine-chilling violence in accounts of post-poll violence. Goa, for example, was appreciated for having accessible elections, in that they made it disabled friendly, old age friendly, and district officers were lauded for these efforts. In terms of law and order, Kerala and Tamil Nadu had largely negative opinion. Most of it emanated from custodial torture, accounts of custodial torture, very localized, but they were there. And in Kerala, it was again communalization of the police in how they dealt with the Shabrimala case and how they dealt with the local feud between two factions in a church. In Meghalaya, it was poor traffic management that became central to the woes of the people. We move next to social justice and how it is to secure to the people of India one of the highest human values. We look at controlling material resources and promoting welfare as envisaged in PAI 22. We look at electricity, roads, education, and vaccination. The latter two are in the context of COVID-19. In terms of electricity, Assam, Bihar, and Haryana had some of the highest proportions of tweets of negative intonation. Some of the common complaints were irregularity in billing and corruption, power outages, failures relating to e-payment systems. One account in Bihar held that frequent electricity cuts in our village due to rainy season, but heartless administration does not acknowledge students' difficulties. This also intersects with developments during COVID-19 and how they intersected with already poor pockets of places where there were power outages. In Nagaland, on the other hand, people were celebrating electrification and just rejoicing wherever there was a new village that was getting electricity. In terms of roads, Jharkhand and Bihar bore a very negative burden of public opinion, and it was mostly because of traffic personnel accepting bribes and potholes causing accidents. Goa, again, uh, was creative in dealing with these woes and customized posters and had road safety campaigns to deal with these issues. Now, in terms of education and vaccination in light of COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic caught health systems the world off guard with its sudden emergence in 2020. Narratives surrounding vaccination were noticeably critical, actually, of the central government more than the state governments. However, in Sikkim, users quizzed the practicality of having a lockdown with restrictions on transport while simultaneously holding vaccination drives, as people would not be able to make it to their camps. In Maharashtra, users berated preferential treatment at vaccination camps to blue tick Twitter users and complained of misappropriation of vaccines by some politicians. In Manipur, on the other hand, users lauded the efforts of the local government in having in their vaccination delivery efforts supported by drones. Some tweets in Manipur also sought to dispel vaccine hesitancy, dissuading locals from giving into false rumors. In the vaccination drive, When the pandemic forced school closures and triggered learning losses, states were coaxed into innovating interventions to tide over the disruptions. Netizens in Meghalaya tweeted a litany of protestations against the move to online education. Online education generated a lot of polarizing views in itself, invoking digital divide. Telangana appeared to feature prominently in the spectrum of dissenting voices against the National Education Policy 2020. Tweets in Karnataka lambasted the conduct of exams by a collegiate public state university amid COVID 19 concerns. Users in Arunachal Pradesh, on the other hand, lauded the efforts of the government, district administrations, and civil society volunteers in ensuring the continuity of education during the pandemic. While at the surface the exercise was an analysis of tweets, at the subsurface there was a lot of trial and error. At the outset, we deal with the question why Twitter? We use Twitter because they make their posts public. To get these tweets in a palatable, usable form, they were extracted alongside their metadata, chief among them the geocode or the geotags. The geolocation formed the basis for a state-wise analysis that we just presented. What we embedded this exercise in was sentiment analysis. As the name suggests, sentiment analysis assigns a sentiment, be it positive or negative. In our case, we were looking at a 5-point refinement between strong positive and strong negative. This objective in Pi 22's case was achieved through a combination of results from two machine learning algorithms. One is VADA and one is recurrent neural network. Without getting into the specifics, which I'm sure my colleague Ramana would be able to dwell on better, we used VADA, which is Valence Aware Dictionary, and Sentiment Reasoner to assign scores of sentiments between -1 and +1. In layman terms, Vader works like an urban dictionary of sorts, where each word has an assigned meaning, has an assigned sentiment. This was supplemented by a recurrent neural network algorithm, which functions very similar to how the human brain functions, and they mimicking the structure of human neurons. Recurrent neural networks also learn from other data points. In our case, the Stanford Tree Bank dataset. Thus were sentiment classes assigned between positive and negative. Finally, all of these were coherently clustered using the hierarchical density-based spatial clustering of applications with noise, what is called as HDB scan. These methods shaped the analysis and gave way to the prominent narratives from the huge corpus of tweets averaging about 1 lakh per topic identified. As with any other study, this exercise has limitations, which I indicated earlier. Key among those caveats is the usage of digital media, what we can also perceive as digital divide. In terms of the rural-urban divide, according to the Telecom Regularity Authority of India, there were 37 internet subscribers per 100 rural population vis-a-vis near universal coverage in urban areas. This manifests in a very stark rural urban divide. In terms of interstate disparities, there are states such as Chhattisgarh, which have an internet subscriber base of 7, single digit per 100 population. And then there are states like Andhra Pradesh, which are staring at near universal internet subscriber base. These factors would positively or negatively affect the corpus of tweets that we extracted. Succeeding these considerations is the matter of internet usage, which is highly gendered, as NFHS also attests to. Females are around 33% females attested to ever using the internet in NFHS 5, against 57% in the case of men. Then there's also the matter of popularity of Twitter, which is intuitively more popular among the younger cohorts. According to informal estimates, about 55% of those using Twitter are between the age of 18 to 34 years. The PAI team, therefore, acknowledges all these caveats and alerts to the reader and you, the audience, of a possible limitation. Also, as a word of caution, there were considerations relating to the algorithmic fitness, which stems from the very localized use of language, the use of vernacular, and the use of English, and how they would actually stump all of these algorithms which are Western made. For those who are in Bangalore, we know that it is not a praise and it is not a criticism for Meghalaya. With all these caveats, we are certain, however, the merit of the exercise in paving ways to systematically dissect the emotional balance and the climate of opinion across states. These analytics have also found resonance with published data points. For example, users in Bihar and Jharkhand shared their road woes of potholes, bribes, poor traffic management, and consequent accidents. These states have the second and fourth highest severity of road accidents as recorded by the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways in 2020. Discourse in Kerala similarly criticized the state's failure in alleviating unemployment distress and in managing the demand for jobs. Although the state performs well across the board in PI 22, employment is a pain point for the state, with a high unemployment rate of 11.6% within the age group of 15 to 59 years. PI 22 therefore recognizes the kaleidoscopic range of meaning making that policy objects are subjected to and humbly submits this exercise as an addendum to analyze the quality of governance across states. With this, I invite my colleague Anjana to summarize the substance of PI 22.
Thank you, Nidhi, for being the voice of the public today. When I started by saying that I wondered how am I going to do it in 20 minutes, what I probably meant was that I'm going to take 30 minutes, but not so much more. Another interesting analysis that we undertook in PI is the time delta analysis. Since there's been a substantial change in the model from the previous year to this year, it makes it difficult to compare. We cannot compare it between the 2 years. So we've tried to do an analysis of how the states fare vis-a-vis themselves from the past 3 years or 5 years. However, in interest of time and to not disclose the final ranks, I wouldn't be able to present the findings. Please try and read the report. I would urge you all to buy one and read them. Uh, to conclude, the accolades and debacles in the rankings apart, the states across India stare at a common finishing line. And to us, it is the directive principles of state policy. While PI 2022 weighs the statistical distance of state governments from realizing their constitutional mandates, the non transactional realization of the Constitution is the ultimate yardstick in a democracy. To this end, the directive principles are where our democratic sensibilities conclusively lie, forming the bedrock of justice. While Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, in the last speech at the Constituent Assembly debate, was filled with protuberance and warning, it was also deeply drenched in hope. Today, with that same sense of hope, I very humbly present to you the Public Affairs Index 2022, not as an epilogue, but as a data driven beacon to improving governance in the states of India. Thank you very much.